Imagine this, a world overflowing with technology, noise, and endless distractions. Social media algorithms shape our thoughts, corporations harvest our desires, and politics thrives on division. Anxiety and depression have become everyday companions for millions. Humanity is wealthier, more connected, and more powerful than ever. And yet, something deep inside us feels fractured, empty, and dangerously close to collapse. Nearly a century ago, the great Swiss psychiatrist Carl Gustav Jung, one of the founding fathers of modern psychology, saw this future with uncanny clarity. He warned that as society advanced materially, it would also drift into spiritual crisis, collective madness, and even destruction if we failed to recognize the hidden forces at work in the human psyche. In this video, we will dive deep into Carl Jung's prophetic warnings for the modern world. We'll explore how his insights into the unconscious, archetypes, technology, mass movements, and the loss of meaning have unfolded with eerie accuracy in our time. We'll see why Jung believed the greatest threat to humanity wasn't nuclear war, economic collapse, or artificial intelligence. It was something far more dangerous, our inability to confront our own inner shadows. So stay with me, because by the end, you'll not only understand Jung's prophetic vision, but also discover why his wisdom might be the key to surviving and thriving in the chaotic world of today. Carl Jung believed that modern society had made one catastrophic mistake. It abandoned the inner world of the psyche in favor of the outer world of science, industry, and materialism. The 20th century saw incredible advances in medicine, technology, and communication. Humanity conquered diseases, built airplanes, split the atom, and even reached the moon. But while all this progress unfolded in the external world, the internal world, the realm of the unconscious mind, of dreams, symbols, and spirituality, was neglected and dismissed. Jung warned that this imbalance would have dire consequences. When we deny or repress the unconscious, he argued, it doesn't disappear. Instead, it builds pressure and eventually erupts in destructive ways, through mass psychosis, ideological fanaticism, and even war. He once wrote, "The world today hangs by a thin thread, and that thread is the psyche of man." That statement is even more true today than when he wrote it. We have advanced weapons that could annihilate the planet, yet we lack the psychological maturity to handle our power responsibly. One of Carl Jung's most profound and enduring insights is the concept of the shadow, the hidden, unconscious parts of ourselves that we refuse to acknowledge or accept. The shadow is not inherently evil, but it contains all those impulses, desires, fears, weaknesses, and even talents that we deny or suppress because they conflict with the image we wish to present to the world. It is the part of the psyche that lives in the shadows of consciousness, quietly influencing our thoughts, decisions, and behaviors. Jung believed that every human being has a shadow, and the health of an individual's psyche depends on how consciously they confront and integrate it. When people fail to face their own shadow, Jung warned, they are likely to project it onto others. Projection is a psychological defense mechanism in which the qualities we reject in ourselves are perceived as existing outside of us, in other people or groups. For example, someone who struggles with anger might see the world as violent or hostile, attributing their own unacknowledged rage to others. Someone who feels envy or jealousy might accuse others of being greedy or malicious. This process allows individuals to avoid self-confrontation, but at a tremendous cost. It externalizes internal conflict and often escalates tension, fear, and hatred in society. Jung observed this dynamic on a massive scale in the rise of Nazism and totalitarian regimes in the 20th century. Ordinary citizens, unwilling to confront the darker impulses within themselves, their prejudices, fears, and aggressive instincts, projected these qualities onto targeted groups. Jews, communists, and other minorities became the scapegoats onto which collective anxieties were projected. Political leaders and propaganda exploited these projections, turning unconscious individual fears into organized social and political violence. Jung understood that the danger of projection is not limited to individuals. It can metastasize into a collective shadow, engulfing entire societies and causing catastrophic consequences. In today's world, the same mechanism is at work, though it has taken new forms amplified by technology and social media. Platforms that were designed to connect us often encourage the projection of our inner shadows outward, into the digital public square. Polarization has become extreme. People unite not around shared purpose or understanding, but around shared anger, fear, and hatred. Conspiracy theories, online bullying, political tribalism, and ideological extremism are often modern expressions of projected shadows. Entire communities can form around the vilification of an other, whether that is a political opponent, a cultural group, or even an individual influencer. By projecting their unacknowledged fears and desires, people find a temporary sense of moral clarity, but it is one built on illusion and division. Jung's warning about projection is profoundly relevant in the age of media. We live in a society where every slight disagreement or difference can become a battleground for projecting the shadow. Disagreements are rarely viewed as differences of opinion. They are moral failings or attacks to be condemned. On social media, the projection of the shadow is magnified by algorithms that reward outrage and confirmation bias. The parts of ourselves that we deny, the envy, resentment, and fear, are amplified when projected onto others, creating cycles of hostility that can feel inescapable. The consequences of failing to confront the shadow are not merely psychological, they are social and political. Jung warned that unchecked projection fuels scapegoating, collective hysteria, and even violence. In his view, societies that refuse to acknowledge the dark impulses within themselves are doomed to repeat cycles of conflict and destruction. When projection becomes a cultural norm, communities and nations can justify war, oppression, and persecution as necessary measures against an evil outside themselves, when in truth, that evil resides within the collective psyche. Yet Jung also offered hope. He argued that recognizing and integrating the shadow is not only necessary for personal growth, but also for societal stability. When individuals take responsibility for their inner darkness, they reduce the need to project it outward. When enough people confront their shadows, societies become less reactive, less polarized, and more capable of compassion, understanding, and rational discourse. The path is difficult. It requires courage, honesty, and self-reflection. But it is the only way to prevent the destructive consequences of projection from taking hold. In essence, Jung's concept of the shadow is a warning for both the individual and humanity as a whole. Unless we confront the darkness within ourselves, we risk creating it outside, in the world around us. And when societies are consumed by collective projection, history repeatedly shows that the results are catastrophic: oppression, war, and social fragmentation. Jung's insight reminds us that the battle for peace and understanding begins not with governments or technologies, but within the human heart and mind. By facing the shadow, we reclaim our agency, restore moral clarity, and take a crucial step toward a more conscious and compassionate society. Jung also foresaw the dangers of mass movements. He observed that in modern societies, individuals often lose their sense of identity and meaning, and they compensate by merging into large ideological or political groups. In his words, the larger a society or confederacy, the greater the amalgamation of collective factors, which is typical of every large organization, the more aggravating are the individual's difficulties. What he meant was that as people join mass movements, they often surrender their individuality. They stop thinking critically and instead absorb the collective mindset. This is how ordinary people can commit atrocities when swept up in the frenzy of a movement. In today's world, we see Jung's warning come alive in the form of online echo chambers, populist movements, and ideological extremism. Individuals, feeling powerless or alienated, cling to collective identities that promise certainty and belonging, but this comes at the cost of their individual freedom and moral responsibility. Jung believed this was one of the greatest dangers of modernity, the annihilation of the individual psyche by the collective. Though Jung lived before the age of smartphones and artificial intelligence, his insights into technology were astonishingly prophetic. He warned that the growing dominance of machines and rational systems would strip life of meaning. Jung feared that in a world governed by science and technology, humans would forget that we are not machines. We are symbolic, myth-making beings who require meaning, purpose, and connection to something greater than ourselves. Today, this warning is painfully clear. Technology has given us godlike powers, but it has also left many people feeling empty and dehumanized. We scroll endlessly on devices designed to exploit our psychological weaknesses. We live in an age of information overload, but wisdom scarcity. Jung would argue that this is not simply a technological problem, it's a spiritual one. By outsourcing too much of our life to machines, we risk losing touch with the depths of the human psyche and the sacred dimension of existence. Carl Jung often spoke of what he called the spiritual crisis of modern man, a condition he believed was one of the most profound threats to contemporary society. Unlike physical crises, which can be measured and addressed with technology or policy, Jung's spiritual crisis is internal, invisible, and profoundly psychological. He argued that as traditional religions and spiritual practices lost their influence in the modern world, human beings would be left without a stable framework to understand their existence, morality, and purpose. This vacuum, he warned, would not remain empty. The spiritual instinct, an inherent human drive for meaning, transcendence, and connection, cannot simply be erased. When its traditional outlets collapse, it seeks new channels, often leading to unexpected or dangerous expressions. Unlike Sigmund Freud, who dismissed religion as a mere illusion or projection of human desires, Jung saw religion as an essential expression of the human psyche. To him, religious symbols, rituals, and narratives were deeply embedded in the unconscious, helping individuals navigate life, death, morality, and suffering. Religion, in its healthiest form, serves as a bridge between the conscious and unconscious mind, connecting people to the archetypal forces that shape human experience. When traditional religious structures weakened in the modern era, Jung believed this did not eliminate the human longing for transcendence. Instead, it left people vulnerable to turning toward incomplete or distorted substitutes that offered form without genuine spiritual nourishment. Jung predicted that ideologies such as nationalism, communism, and even consumerism could fill this void, effectively functioning as substitute religions. Each provides its own set of dogmas, rituals, heroes, and villains. Nationalism elevates the nation-state to a sacred entity, with its leaders as quasi-prophetic figures and enemies framed as moral evils. Consumerism offers endless rituals of acquisition, branding individuals as morally virtuous or deficient based on their consumption patterns. Communism, in its ideological extremes, demanded almost religious devotion to a collective ideal. While these systems provide structure and meaning, they often fail to satisfy the deeper spiritual hunger, leaving people with a sense of emptiness, disconnection, and anxiety that is difficult to name or confront. In today's world, Jung's warnings feel eerily prescient. Consider the pervasive culture of celebrity worship, where influencers and pop stars are elevated to almost divine status. Entire communities form around shared devotion to these figures, mirroring religious congregations. The promises of fame, wealth, and social influence act as modern analogs of salvation, but they rarely provide the deeper sense of purpose or moral grounding that humans instinctively crave. Similarly, political cults and extreme ideological movements offer belonging, certainty, and moral clarity, effectively functioning as secular substitutes or religion. Consumer culture, with its endless cycle of desire and acquisition, seduces people with the illusion of fulfillment while leaving them spiritually starved. Jung recognized this dynamic and warned that societies that fail to nourish the spiritual dimension of life are vulnerable to existential despair, mass disillusionment, and social fragmentation. Jung's solution to the spiritual crisis was not a return to blind dogma or rigid orthodoxy. He did not advocate simply re-embracing traditional religions as they were. Rather, he called for a rediscovery of the symbolic and mythic dimension of life. Symbols, myths, and archetypal narratives are universal patterns embedded in the human psyche, carrying meaning across cultures and centuries. Engaging with these symbolic systems allows individuals to reconnect with the deeper currents of existence, giving life direction and purpose beyond material success or social validation. For Jung, activities like studying myths, interpreting dreams, creating art, or participating in meaningful rituals are not merely aesthetic or recreational. They are profound ways to engage with the unconscious and restore spiritual equilibrium. Moreover, Jung emphasized that the spiritual crisis of modern man is not simply a philosophical problem. It is a psychological necessity to confront. Without connecting to something larger than oneself, whether through myth, symbolism, or inner exploration, individuals risk living fragmented lives dominated by fear, anxiety, or compulsion. The absence of spiritual grounding can lead to destructive behaviors, dependency on addictive pleasures, or a blind adherence to ideologies that promise meaning but deliver emptiness. By cultivating a conscious relationship with the symbolic and transcendent dimensions of life, individuals can achieve what Jung called individuation, a state in which the conscious and unconscious are integrated, allowing for both personal fulfillment and ethical engagement with the world. In essence, Jung's vision of the spiritual crisis of modern man is a call to action. It is a reminder that material advancement alone cannot fulfill the human spirit. Technology, wealth, and social progress, while remarkable, cannot replace the profound need for connection to the sacred, the archetypal, and the unconscious. Jung's teachings urge us to pause, look inward, and reclaim the spiritual dimension of our lives, not as an escape from reality, but as a foundation for meaning, morality, and psychological resilience. In a world increasingly dominated by distraction, superficiality, and ideological extremism, his insights remain not only relevant but vital. One of Jung's most urgent warnings was that humanity is largely unconscious of its own psyche. He said that people believe they are rational, but in truth, they are often driven by unconscious forces they barely understand. He compared the unconscious to a vast ocean beneath the surface of the mind. Ignoring it doesn't make it disappear. It simply ensures we are controlled by it blindly. For Jung, this was the real danger behind modern crises. Wars, genocides, and ideological fanaticism were not simply political events. They were eruptions of the collective unconscious, mythic, archetypal forces breaking into history. And Jung warned that unless humanity became more conscious of these forces, the cycle would repeat endlessly. In today's terms, this means that unless we become aware of how unconscious drives shape our behavior, our fears, desires, hatreds, and addictions, we will remain vulnerable to manipulation by propaganda, advertising, and political demagogues. In the aftermath of World War II, Carl Jung was among the first thinkers to recognize the existential threat posed by nuclear weapons. Unlike many contemporaries who focused solely on technical or political solutions, Jung understood that the danger of atomic power was deeply psychological. He warned that the threat was not contained in the bombs themselves. Their destructive capacity was merely a reflection of human ingenuity, but in the immature and unintegrated psyche of those who wielded such unprecedented power. In his view, humanity had reached a point where it could annihilate itself, and yet its moral, ethical, and psychological development had not kept pace with its technological progress. Jung famously stated, "We are the origin of all coming evil." With this stark observation, he shifted the focus from external factors to the human mind itself. Nuclear weapons, he suggested, were a mirror, reflecting our inner darkness and unconscious impulses on a scale never seen before in history. If individuals and societies remain blind to their own destructive tendencies, he argued, technology, no matter how advanced, will only magnify them. The problem is not atomic power, but the projection of the shadow, the unacknowledged and often violent impulses that dwell in the human unconscious. Left unchecked, these forces can manifest on a global scale, transforming potential progress into catastrophic destruction. Jung's concern went beyond the immediate post-war period. He understood that this dynamic would persist and even intensify as humanity continued to advance. In his writings, he warned that technological innovation, when divorced from psychological maturity, could become a dangerous amplifier of human destructiveness. Nuclear weapons were the first modern example of this principle, but Jung foresaw a future in which similar risks would arise with any powerful tool capable of changing the world. From his perspective, moral and spiritual development must precede, or at least accompany, technological progress. Otherwise, humanity risks becoming its own worst enemy. Fast forward to the present day, and Jung's warnings feel astonishingly relevant. While nuclear weapons remain a persistent global threat, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and climate change have emerged as new arenas in which human unconscious drives could wreak havoc. Artificial intelligence, for example, offers unprecedented potential to solve complex problems, but in the hands of individuals or groups unprepared for its ethical implications, It could also reinforce biases, concentrate power, or enable large-scale harm. Biotechnology, capable of editing genes and manipulating life itself, holds promises of curing disease, yet it also presents the terrifying possibility of misuse on a societal or even species-wide scale. Climate change, driven largely by human exploitation of natural resources, reflects the collective projection of greed, short-term thinking, and denial onto the environment. In each of these cases, Jung would likely remind us that the real danger lies not in the tools themselves, but in the unconscious human psyche acting through them. What Jung illuminates is a profound principle. Humanity's technological creations are psychological extensions of our inner life. When our shadow, the repressed fears, destructive impulses, and unacknowledged aggression, is projected outward, it finds expression in the systems we build, from weapons of mass destruction to complex algorithms. Without conscious integration of these shadow elements, progress itself becomes a vehicle for catastrophe. In other words, no matter how sophisticated or intelligent our tools become, they cannot substitute for the maturity, ethical insight, and self-awareness that humans must cultivate internally. Jung's perspective challenges a common assumption of modernity, that technological progress automatically leads to social and moral progress. History shows us that this is not the case. Humanity's most advanced tools, nuclear weapons, industrial machinery, AI, or synthetic biology, have immense potential for good, but they also amplify our capacity for evil. By understanding that the danger resides within us, not the technology, we are reminded that the solutions must be psychological and spiritual as well as technical. The evolution of consciousness, Jung argued, is the only safeguard against self-destruction. Ultimately, Jung's reflections on nuclear weapons and other existential threats compel us to confront a simple but unsettling truth. Our future depends on our inner development as much as our external achievements. If we fail to recognize and integrate the shadow within ourselves, the very tools designed to improve human life may become instruments of destruction. Conversely, by cultivating awareness, moral responsibility, and psychological maturity, humanity can wield these powerful tools not as agents of annihilation, but as instruments of progress, healing, and creative transformation. Jung's message, though articulated in the shadow of World War II, remains urgent today. In a time of unprecedented technological capability and global interconnection, he reminds us that self-destruction is never a distant abstract threat. It is always rooted in the human mind. To survive, evolve, and thrive, we must turn inward as much as we reach outward, ensuring that the immense power we have created is guided by conscious, integrated, and ethical human intent. So what was Jung's solution? He didn't believe in political revolutions or mass movements as answers. Instead, he emphasized the process of individuation, the lifelong journey of integrating the unconscious, confronting the shadow, and becoming a whole, authentic individual. For Jung, if enough individuals pursued individuation, society as a whole could heal. He believed that true change always begins within the individual psyche, not in external systems. This process requires courage. It means confronting the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore, exploring our dreams, engaging with myth and symbolism, and cultivating a relationship with the deeper self. Jung believed that this inner work was not optional. It was essential for the survival of humanity. Carl Jung's prophetic warnings resonate with startling clarity in today's world. He foresaw the rise of mass movements, the dangers of technology, the loss of meaning, and the eruption of the collective shadow. He understood that without psychological maturity, humanity would be doomed to repeat cycles of self-destruction. But Jung also offered hope. He believed that within each individual lies the potential for transformation, healing, and wisdom. If we can turn inward, confront our shadows, and reconnect with the deeper dimensions of the psyche, then the crises of the modern world can become opportunities for renewal. In a time of global chaos, Jung's voice reminds us of a timeless truth. The greatest danger to humanity is not out there, it is within us. And so is the solution. So what do you think? Are we living out Jung's prophecy today? Have his warnings come true in your own life or in the world around you? If you found this exploration of Carl Jung's vision insightful, don't forget to like this video, Subscribe for more deep dives into psychology and philosophy, and share it with anyone who you think needs to hear Jung's message. Because if Jung was right, and many signs suggest he was, then the survival of our world may very well depend on each of us beginning the journey inward.